okay, we'll get started. I want to thank Rabbi Ziring once again for his very insightful and high-level shirim. The shir I missed, by the way, I love the shir on. I loved your shir on asmachta. I have a question or two on that, on the three approaches to asmachta and how he explained the pshat and the two psukim coming together. Up to Chazal had a. Or up to rabbis of every generation to decide which pasuk to apply when. Anyways, I thought
that was definitely the most fun. That piece in
So now we'll talk on Kiddushat Shvit. You haven't really gotten into Heter Mechira at all, but okay. Well, I don't know if you'll touch upon it today or not, but we will find out. B'kasha, Rabbi Ziring. Maybe you don't want to go there. It's too hot.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Kelman. So the last few weeks we've been exploring different aspects of Shmita, specifically Tosefet Shvi'it. So today I want to talk about Tosefet Shvi'it itself, and specifically what that tells us about the Shmita year. So as we've been talking about, as much as we think of Shmita as the seventh year, which starts, as we were talking before Shir, beginning of September this year, with a nice early Rosh Hashanah, at least on the secular calendar. The truth is that in the time of the Mishnah, in the time restrictions would have already started for Shmita, some as early as Shavuot. So we're talking several weeks ago already. And then as the Gemara goes through, different times depending on the specific act, agricultural act that you're talking about, plowing, and with certain exceptions, and the beginning discussions in Masechet Shvi'it go through extensive details about this. What work can you do? Under what circumstances? How many trees? Right? If you have the halacha is the law is one way if you're trying to work on a single tree or a single plant, as opposed to a field, as opposed to an orchard or a vineyard. And it depends on how much it produces, and it depends on how much is needed in terms of watering, in terms, etc. And nowadays, that's not the case, right? Nowadays, the laws of Shmita, for the most part, only go into effect starting on Rosh Hashanah. And that's in terms of Shmita of the land, right? The land-related laws. The monetary laws of Shmita actually happen at the end. The end of Shmita is when the wiping away of loans happens. That happens with the culmination of Shmita going into the 8th year. What I want to do is try to understand a little bit about Shmita from this lens of Tosefet Shvi'it, of why is it, right? What does this mean? That there was this notion that we start Shmita early. Because it really is, it's sort of strange, meaning it's true that, as we'll see, we do have similar notions on Shabbat and Yom Tov, but it really is odd, right? When we think about Shabbat, so we think Shabbat starts Friday night when the sun goes down until Saturday evening, because the halachic day starts at night, so Shabbat is simply the night, right? The 7th day starting at night until the end of the day, but it's not extensively. Maybe it's a few minutes. We try to add to Shabbat, but fundamentally Shabbat starts when Shabbat is supposed to start, not before, and ends when it's supposed to end, and not after. If you want to add, you can, as we'll see, but there isn't. Shabbat is Shabbat. And the same thing is true of most mitzvot, right? If there's a mitzvah to do something at a particular time, so you do it at that time. You don't do it before that time. You don't do it after that time. You do it during that time. And yet, not only does Shmita have this idea of Tosefet, adding before and after, but this is how the entire discussion of Shvi'it begins in the Mishnah. Now, part of that may simply be because the Mishnah is often, as it is Masechet Shabbat, ordered chronologically. And the first thing that you'll hit in Shmita, obviously, are the additional times of Shmita in anticipation. But what I want to do is try to understand this law, and we won't necessarily go through all the sources, but what I want to do is present the two central ways of understanding that and see what that tells us about Shmita. Because again, even if right now we don't practically follow the laws of Tosefet Shvi'it, because as we'll see, they're no longer relevant, or we don't rule that way, their concepts do shed light, especially since if we were to hold up the laws of Tosefet Shvi'it, then already now in the weeks and months leading up to Shmita, we would have already started practicing the laws and respecting the prohibitions that are related with the year. So what is this thing that we've been talking about of Tosefet Shvi'it? So as you can see from the title, I've sort of given away the two main models, but we'll explore how we get there. And I entitled it Preparing for Shmita or Expanding Its Holiness. And as we'll see, this is the fundamental question about Tosefet Shvi'it. Right, we'll say it in one sentence now, but then we'll flesh it out and explore what this tells us about Shmita. One way of understanding these laws of the additional time of Shmita is that really Shmita begins on Rosh Hashanah. So beginning of September, when we're all going back to school, as Rabbi Kelman mentioned. So that time also Shmita will start, right? It will be a new school year, and it will be a holy year. And at that point, laws will take effect. But just like it's not really responsible to start thinking about the school year on the first day of school, whatever it is, the day after Labor Day, right? In order to responsibly start the year, as everyone knows, if you want to responsibly start the school year, so you got to start thinking about it before, right? You've got to start preparing for it before. And if you, right, you need to buy your supplies, you need to make sure you have your books, etc. on the positive side. And on the negative side, you also have to avoid habits that will be unhealthy during the school year, right? If people, as they're going into the school year, have gotten used to going to sleep at 3 a.m. and waking up at 11 a.m, they won't make it for the school bus or whatever it might be. Or and if you want to make sure that you go smoothly into the school year, so you need to start acting or start acclimating yourself to the school year in anticipation. And one way of thinking about Tosefet Shvi'it is this way, which is, we'll tweak it, but that one way of thinking about it is, look, it's not that Shmita starts early, but when you start preparing for Shmita, that requires doing things in anticipation. Now, the exact formulation we'll see in a few minutes of what that would mean. But that's one model, which is to say, look, Shmita doesn't start early. It's just like everything in life requires preparation. The one for Shmita is very unique, but that's really what's going on, is that there are certain limitations in terms of what you can do because you need to start preparing for Shmita. The other model is that, no, what I call expanding its holiness, which is, it's very odd, but despite the fact that Shmita is called the 7th year, right? It's the Shana HaShvi'it. That's not really true, right? The fact that we have Tosefet Shvi'it tells you that despite the fact that Shmita is definitionally the 7th year, at some level, it's more than that. It overflows, right? Its holiness, while primarily concentrated in year 7, overflows into the concluding months of year 6, meaning right now. And on the other hand, overflows into the beginning of year 8. And there are certain indications of this. We won't deal with it too much now, but the beginning weeks of the 8th year in the Shmitta cycle, also known as the first year in the Shmitta cycle, is unique. Has a unique mitzvah, which does seem to be related to the Shmitta cycle, namely Hakel, right? The year of Shmitta and all of its deepened spirituality and whatever is reflected in Shmitta means that when you come out of Shmitta, on the Sukkot of the 8th year, so the weeks following Shmitta, the king comes and gathers the entire Jewish people to the Beit HaMikdash to read the Torah, which, as the Rambam suggests, is a recreation of the revelation at Sinai. And this does seem to be, at some level, be the culminating moments of Shmitta, even though they take place not in year 7, but in year 8. So with those two models, but again, we're going to sharpen them. Let's turn to the sugya. So if you look at the first source, and we've seen it several times, but now let's zero in on some of the formulations here. The Gemara Rosh Hashanah Daf Tet tells us, "Udimosifin michal al hakodesh minola." From where do we derive the principle that one extends a sanctified period by adding from the profane to the sacred at both ends? Ditanya, so the Gemara answers, based on the Braita, Becharish uvekatzir tishbot. Right, you shall rest from plowing and harvesting. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Eino tzarich lomar charish v'chatzir shel shvit. As we talked about last week, despite the fact that this verse at least sounds like in the Torah, like it's talking about Shabbat, the day, Rabbi Kiva takes it to mean Shmita, Shvi'it, the sabbatical year rather than day. So he says, you don't have to tell me. We already know that you aren't allowed to plant and to plow. What we're learning here is that you cannot plow in the 6th year going into Shmita, hanichnas l'shvit, going in, the katzir shel shvit hayotzei l'matzei shvit, nor can you harvest on the other end, beginning of the 8th year. Rabbi Ishmael argues and says, ma charish reshut af katzir reshut, yata katzir omer shuv mitzvah. He rejects this in its entirety, and he says that's not what this is talking about. It's telling you that even on Shabbat, the only agricultural work you can't do is that which is not mitzvah-oriented. But mitzvah-oriented agricultural work, like cutting down the produce for the Karban HaOmer on the 2nd day of Pesach, that is permitted even on Shabbat. So then the Gemara says, Rabbi Ishmael mosifin michol al kodesh minole. So then how does he know that you can add to Shabbat? So nafka le miditanya v'initem et nafshotechem. He derives it from the laws of Yom Kippurim, where it says, and you shall afflict your souls with bit tish'ah on the 9th day. Now, as the Gemara notes, that's not really the case. Yom Kippur is not the 9th day of Tishrei, but the 10th. Yachol bit tish'ah. Are you really telling me you have to fast on the 9th day? It's on the 10th day. Talmud lomar ba'erev. So what it teaches you is at night. So I ba'erev. If we're talking about at night, Yachol misha techshach, maybe that just means when it actually is night, meaning the 10th. Talmud lomar batisha. No, it says the 9th. Ha-ketzad. So what do we learn from here? Matchil mitanem mi be'od yom. On Yom Kippur, there's a mitzvah to start fasting before Yom Kippur actually starts. Milamed, from here we derive shemosifin michal ala kodesh, that you add from the profane, from the mundane to the holy. How do we know that that's true on the end part of Yom Kippur as well? Talmud lomar me'erev ad erev, because it's true on both, from evening to evening, on both sides. And how do you know that the same is true on Shabbat? Talmud lomar tishpetu. It says you shall rest. Yamim tovim. What about other holidays? Talmud lomar Shabbatchem. Your Shabbat. Ha-ketzad, what does that tell you? Kol makom sheyesh bo shvut mosifin michal al hakodesh. So what we have here are two main positions. We have Rabbi Kiva, who says that you add to the holiness. His paradigm for adding holiness is Shmita, that we start prohibiting some of the agricultural work already in year 6, and we continue the prohibitions to year 8. Rabbi Shmuel rejects it. Rabbi Shmuel says if there is such an idea of expanding holiness, we derive it in the context of the holidays of Yom Kippur, Shabbat, the other holidays, but not in the context of Shmita. Rabbi Shmuel, however, does believe in a certain type of Tosefet Shvit, right, of adding to Shmita. However, he derives it from a different source. And if you look at the second source here from Moed Katan, the Gemara quotes the same tradition, but then here on the third line, the Gemara then justifies Rabbi Shmuel. Ela Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Ki Gemire Hilchata. Actually, let me skip down. Sorry, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan Ram Gamliel Beit Yinomi D'Oraita Batel. Biblically, we got rid of this addition. Why? My time, Gamar Shabbat Mi Shabbat Breshit. We derive Shmita from Shabbat. Ma lahalan hi asura lifanea ulacharea mutarin. On Shabbat, the only time it's prohibited to work is Shabbat itself, but before and after is not. So the same thing is true on Shmita. Then the Gemara gets into a technicality, which I don't want to get into too much. So then the Gemara's final conclusion is as follows. Amar of Ashi, Rabbi Gamliel, but Sabri la Rabbi Ishmael, Damar Hilcheta Gemiri. Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Gamliel, who follows in his position, believe that there is an addition to Shmita. However, it's not based on a verse. It's not based on a pasuk. It's based on an oral tradition to Sinai. Hilcheta Gemiri. V'chi Gemiri Hilcheta. But when did we derive that this law applies? When do we have a tradition that you add to Shmita? Bizman Shebeit HaMikdash Kayam. Only when the temple stands. Dumya Deniso Chamayim, just like the libations of the water on the altar on Sukkot. Avozman Shebeit Ein Beit HaMikdash Kayam Lo. But when there is no temple, there is no such prohibition. So the Gemara now clarifies that we have two minds. We have Rabbi Akiva, who thinks that adding to Shmita is biblical, based on the pasuk B'charish of Katzir Tishbot. Rabbi Ishmael, followed by Rabbi Gamliel, believe that there is a value in adding to Shmita, but it's based on an oral tradition. However, part of the oral tradition, as Rabbi Ishmael has it, as Rabbi Gamliel has it, is that the addition to Shmita only applies in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So those are the two traditions we have. But now, as I said, the question that we need to understand is, okay, but what is this all about? Right? Why would you why would you add to Shmita? Why wouldn't you add to Shmita? Is in the end of the day, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel both think you add to Shmita. One derives it from a verse, one derives it from an oral tradition, admittedly one that's limited to the time of the temple. Is there a difference between them? So that's what we turn to now. If you look at Rashi in number 3, Rashi seems to believe that Tosefet Shvi'it is prohibited because you are preparing substantively for Shmita, and that's a problem. Right? So Rashi in 3 tells you, Charesh shel Erev Shvi'it, shelo yacharosh sdei ilan Erev Shvi'it, Charish sheyoil la Shvi'it. You cannot plow a orchard in the 6th year in a way that plowing it will help year 7. Right? That's the problem. So Rashi seems at first glance to tell us that the reason that there exists an idea of Tosefet Shvi'it, of adding to Shmita, is because we don't want you to basically set in motion actions now, right now, and these weeks leading up to Shmita, that will literally bear fruit in Shmita, right? That's the problem. But this is a little bit odd. We do have a model of this in Shabbat that is rejected halachic. There is in the first parak of Shabbat, there is a dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, whether during Shabbat it's only prohibited for you to do work, or what's called shvitat kelim. Is there also a prohibition for your vessels, your objects, your machines to work, quote unquote, on Shabbat? Beit Hillel says you can't work on Shabbat, but your machines can. And Beit Shammai says that's not true. Your machines also can't. So, for Beit Hillel, to take a modern example, barring maybe rabbinic problems, but fundamentally on a biblical level, definitely, and for rabbinically, according to many poskim as well, you could set your dishwasher on a timer before Shabbat, even though your dishwasher on Shabbat will turn on the hot water, right? Will boil its hot water. At least Israeli ones boil the hot water to conserve water, right? It'll use soap that's a bar, right? A tablet, which is mimareach. You can do that. You can set it before Shabbat, right? At least here, it's very common to get the Shabbat mode ones, which on top of setting the timer, it also turns off the sensors so that before Shabbat starts, your dishwasher, right? Once you press the button, it'll go on whether the dishwasher is open or closed. So by time Shabbat comes, even closing the dishwasher does nothing, right? Meaning it's going to go on. If you forget to close the dishwasher, the water is going to go all over the floor, and that's totally fine. There are some who don't like it. Full disclosure, I do use my dishwasher timer on Shabbat. I think it's fine because fundamentally you paskin like Beit Hillel that you're allowed to set your vessels, your machines in motion to do things on Shabbat. And there are some, like I said, there's some rabbinic problems. Maybe it makes noise, so it's hashmat kol, but that's not really true of most dishwashers. But that's the type of thing that Beit Shammai would say you can't do that. You can't set in motion actions that are going to take place on Shabbat. Beit Hillel says you can. So Rashi seems to believe that this thing called Tosefet Shvi'it is like that. That just like Beit Shammai thought that you can't set your dishwasher on a timer before Shabbat, right? Or set it in motion before Shabbat, or have it going already before Shabbat to continue into Shabbat. Obviously, he didn't have timers. Because is key. The same thing is true on Shmita. But let's push this a little bit farther. What exactly does this mean? Right? Meaning, okay, so I found a parallel. Just like in Shmita, Rashi says the problem with Tosefet Shvi'it is that we don't want to set in motion things that will bear fruit, literally, during Shmita. So, and I said we have a model like that on Shabbat for Beit Shammai. I can't set my dishwasher in motion or whatever. Fine, I have a model. But what does that actually mean? Meaning, why? Right? Why is that true? Because Beit Hillel, let's say in Shabbat, let's take the analogy from Shabbat. Beit Hillel makes a lot of sense. I can't work on Shabbat. But if I set a timer, I set my vessel, I set my dishwasher in motion before Shabbat, I'm not doing work. And on Shabbat, I'm not allowed to work. So I'm not. So moving to Shmita now, you've got to ask, what exactly is Rashi telling you? Rashi says that the reason that there were prohibitions that started in Shmita, starting at Shavuot, starting in the weeks leading up, starting in Elul, starting whatever, right? Different times for different things, is because you can't plant if it will bear fruit in Shmita. But why not? Right? I'm not doing anything, right? if my fruit tree of its own accord bears fruit during Shmitta, right? I planted it 10 years ago and it bears fruit. I hope one day I don't have success with my fruit trees. My lemon tree, I did plant several years ago. And, from a pre-existing tree, it has not produced lemons. But I hope that, in Shmitta, magically, it'll produce lemons. Why? I didn't do any work. I'm allowed to eat that fruit. It's according to some a mitzvah to eat that fruit, right? We want there to be fruit on the trees. We just don't want you to own them. We don't want you to treat them as an owner, but we want there to be fruit, right? That's the whole point, right? There'll be fruit on the trees. You'll let the poor people come into your field. You'll let the animals eat it, right? You'll relinquish control over valuable produce because you'll recognize the land as God's. Meaning, it's not like in Shmitta, we don't want there to be fruit, right? We want there to be fruit. We just don't want you to assert ownership over the fruit. We don't want you to work the land, but the land doesn't need to disappear, right? You're eating off the fruit of the land. It just is holy. So why would Rashi say that you can't prepare for Shmitta? So what many people suggest and I'll say it outside, we'll see how much we have time to do inside, is that this touches on a major question in Shmitta. And after I say this, I'll take some questions. And that is, when we say that you can't work the field during Shmitta, there are two ways of understanding that, two main ways of understanding that. One is the way I've been formulating it until now, which is you can't work the field in Shmitta because every person is prohibited to perform agricultural work during Shmitta. I can't plow. I can't harvest. I can't sow. I can't reap. I can't water. I can't whatever. I can't prune. However, many of the psukim indicate that there's more to Shmitta than that. Because many of the psukim talk not just about what you do, but they talk about Shabbat haaretz, right? Vishavta haaretz. The land will rest, right? The land will get a sabbatical. The land will relax, as it were. And therefore, and this is the preferred formulation, for example, of the Minchat Chinuch, perhaps in Shmitta, it's not just the human being that's called on to rest, but the human beings are called on to ensure that the land itself rests, that the land itself stops working, right? It's more demanding than just saying you don't plow. Part of recognizing the land is God's, part of recognizing that you aren't the owner of the land is allowing the land itself to rest. And if that's the case, then Rashi might make a lot of sense. Because once you say this, once you say that your job in Shmitta isn't just to stop working, but is to make sure that the land rests. So the way to do that is to not set in motion actions right before Shmitta that are going to make sure that without you doing anything, the land is working, right? And if you plant a tree or you plow a week before Shmitta, and that jumpstarts the growing process in the land, then that means that the land, you might be resting, right? Come Rosh Hashanah, you're going to stop working, but the land is not going to be working because you set, right? Being planting always, you set things in motion months before, right? That's the way planting works. That's the way agricultural works, right? Agriculture doesn't work that I decide one day I want apples, right? So I put a seed in the ground in the morning, add some water, come back 3 hours later, and there's an apple tree, right? I plant an apple tree, I water it, I tend to it, I add fertilizer, right? I work on it for years, and years later, it produces fruit, right? The very nature of agriculture is that it's a process. And therefore, obviously, we can't say that nothing should ever grow in Shmita. That's not the point. But at some level, if the point of Shmita is to make sure that the land rests, then it's not enough to stop working 30 seconds before Shmita starts, right? To give the land a break, you got to start in advance, right? You've got to start in advance, and you've got to give it a break afterwards, right? Because otherwise it ruins Shmita, right? I'll give you an example. I saw an article a few years ago. There was a company that realized that its workers were not getting a break on vacation, right? Why? Because they said, look, we want our workers to be refreshed when they go on vacation, because this way they'll work better when they come back. But what happens? They go on vacation and they start answering their emails. They start checking their phone, right? Their phone. So they don't rest. But then they realize that that's not enough. They said, well, wait a second. Let's say we tell our workers, we don't want you to answer any emails while you're on vacation. We want you to take your 2 weeks vacation. We don't want you to answer your email at all. But what's going to happen? So inevitably, right, the worker puts on his, I know I do this, right? I put on my email, right? My vacation note, right? I'm away for a week, right? I have limited access to email. I won't be checking my computer, right? But I also know that that means that at the back of my mind, I'm dreading the day after vacation, because then if I'm away for 2 weeks, so 2 weeks of emails that didn't respond built up. So one company decided that they wanted their workers to have real vacation. So what they did was they said, here's what's going to happen. When you go on vacation, we're temporarily suspending your work email. And when an email is sent to your work email, an automatic response will go back to the person which says, this person is on vacation. Their email is temporarily inactive. Any email you send will be shredded. If you want them to see this, you have to email them again after such and such a date. And this way, the workers had vacation because they knew they didn't have work building up for them, because no one was even capable of sending them emails during vacation. There wasn't build up work, so they could actually enjoy their rest. So one way of thinking about Tosefet Shvi'it is this way, is that if you want the land to rest, right, it's like your worker. They're not going to enjoy their work if you pound them with extra work, right? You say, you're away for 2 weeks. I need you to do 3 extra weeks worth of work on the day before, right? The week before you leave, because then it's going to take them time to unwind from the extra stress. And if you let their emails build up so that the day they come back, already towards the end of their vacation, they're not enjoying it because they're dreading the overflow of work. The only way to make sure that they actually enjoy their vacation is to put a little bit of a buffer, that you can't build up work in anticipation, and that you can't let work build up that's going to overflow into the days afterwards. And in order to do that, you add to both sides. So if our job is to make sure that the land rests, and not just that we rest, so then what Rashi says is, look, you can't set in motion things. You're right, you're not working, but you've got to give the land a break. You want to give the land a break, you can't work until the last second, and then the second Shmita finishes, start harvesting, right? What you need to do is make sure that they ease in, right? That the pressure is off already coming up to Shmita, and that after Shmita, you ease out of it so that the middle Shmita itself is relaxing for the land. Okay, I have a few questions. Someone asked me if this email-less vacation company is still in business. I hope so. I don't know. I have to find this original article. I was struck by it. It was, okay. What defines actions that help prepare for Shmita and those that Rashi objects to? Okay, so the question of exactly which actions is complicated. The first and second parak of Shvi'it deal with this. The classic case is harisha, is plowing. The exact other ones are not clear, right? I mean, harisha is the classic. Many of the others don't. right? A lot of the other milachot, watering and the like, that's not prohibited. But the classic one is harisha. The exact malachot and exact parameters is discussed in the first and second parak of Shvi'it. Okay. Bear, shvut, and shmita. But since the produce grain is ownerless, the poor can gather. So aren't we lessening the food available to the poor? That's a very good question, right? Meaning, so someone asked, I don't know who, it just says iPad, but isn't this counterproductive? Meaning, if the purpose of Shmita is to ensure that the poor have food, so aren't you at some level detracting from that social goal, from that economic goal of taking care of the poor by minimizing the potential yield during the Shmita year? I think the answer is yes, 100%. And that's why understanding Tosefet Shvi'it is so important to understanding Shmita. Meaning, if in fact the only value to Shmita was making sure that the poor have food, then you're right? What we should do is work as hard as you possibly can until the second before Shmita, so that you have maximum yield during Shmita, so the poor can eat the food. But if, on the other hand, you think that in addition to that goal of helping the poor have food with dignity, the land itself has to rest, right? And that's part of relinquishing control, and that's part of recognizing God's hand in this world. That might require more. It might, right? There's a tension here between the different goals of Shemitah. And you're right. It might be that the poor will not get quite the same yield, but on the other hand, you'll allow the land to rest, which will recognize some of the theological aspects of Shemitah. Jennifer asks, regarding Shabbat, if I prepare paper towels in advance, so no tearing, set aside coffee filter, is this a violation of setting in motion? So on Shabbat, in the end of the day, we don't prohibit setting things in motion because we paskin like Beit Hillel. Even Beit Shammai would only say it's prohibited to set in motion things that will be performed milachot, right, on Shabbat itself. But like tearing toilet paper or something like that, or paper towels, I mean, once it's torn, the malacha is over, so that is fine. But your laundry or your coffee maker or a coffee machine, that might be a different story. What if everyone actually sends the email the day they come back? I assume they're hoping that doesn't happen. I don't know. Something has to give. But look, it's very important. It is very important. Many studies have been done about how people never really get a vacation because their mind never rests because they're always waiting for the next email. Okay. I put a lot of sources here. We won't get through everything, but let me make sure to get out the other model, and then whatever we get beyond that is fine. To get to that, I'm going to skip all the way to 11 here. Ramosha Feinstein argues that the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael is more than just whether the addition to Shemitah is based on a verse or based on an oral tradition from Sinai. But rather, he thinks it cuts to the heart of what Tosefet Shvi'it is. And he says as follows, Yesh chiluk begeder ha'isur, bein im yalfinan mikrai o mehalacha. There's two different ways of understanding it, one that comes from the verses and the other from the oral tradition. Di'im mehalacha hevei ha'isur al yamim shenitosaf od shloshim yom ladin shnat hashvi'it, ve'geder ha'isur de shloshim yom mitzad ha'yamim be'atzman, kamo isur de shana hashvi'it. He said the oral tradition, well, let me contrast it with this. He says, V'lo mitzad shenichnas acharish l'shvi'it, aval im mikrai have yisur machmat shebishvil shvi'it. Aval mitzad yamim be'atzman hayamutar ad Rosh Hashanah. So Ramosha Feinstein argues there's really two very different ways of understanding this. If you derive it from psukim, so then Rav Moshe thinks that Rashi is right. That what does Rabbi Akiva say? B'charish uvekatzir tishbo. Rest from plowing and harvesting. Which he says, which harvesting and plowing is that? the plowing in year 6 going into 7, and the harvesting in year 8 coming out of year 7. And as Rashi understood that, that meant that there's a prohibition to prepare for Shmita, to set in motion, things that will make the land work. However, there's another way of thinking about Tosefet Shmita, of Tosefet Shvi'it, and that is what he calls Mitzad Atzman. That the secret of Tosefet Shvi'it is that Shvi'it is a misnomer. Shmita isn't only Shana Shvi'it. It's not only the 7th year. If you think that we add days, not because they prepare, it's because it actually starts earlier. The holiness itself overflows. And Shmita, it's not just that you can't prepare for Shmita in the weeks leading up to year 7. It's that the holiness at some level overflowed into year 6 and overflowed on the other side to year 8. And therefore, that prohibits plowing in anticipation of Shmita and some harvesting in year 8 of produce from Shmita. But then Ramosha asks a fascinating question. He says, okay, fine, that's great. However, there's a rule. As someone asked this before, there's a rule. What type of actions aren't you allowed to do in year 6, leading into year 7? So the Mishnah tells us that it depends. If you have a tree, and the work you need to do on the tree is to tend to the produce that grew in year 6, so then you're allowed to continue working that tree all the way up till Shmita. But if the work that you're doing isn't to tend to the fruit that grew in year 6, but is to prepare the tree and the fruit of year 7, so then it's prohibited. So Moshe says, but wait a second. If Rashi is right, that what Tosefet Shvi'it tells us is that you aren't allowed to prepare for Shmita. You have to make sure the land rests. So then I understand. Because if me standing 5-6 weeks before Shmita, I have an apple tree, and I look at my tree and I say, if I don't prune a little bit, water a little bit, plow a little bit, clear things up a little bit, the apples that are already there are going to die. So then I can look at it and say, I'm not preparing for Shmita. I'm taking care of my apples. I'm taking care of my oranges. I'm taking care of my whatever. But if I come to my tree and I say, okay, I'm done. I got my apple harvest in. Everything on my tree is good. I already got to start looking forward to year 7. Let me start plowing and preparing. So that's problematic. But Rav Moshe says, but wait a second. If that's not how you're supposed to understand Tosefet Shvi'it, but the proper way to understand Tosefet Shvi'it is that holiness overflows. It expands. And the end of year 6 actually becomes part of Shmita. And the beginning of year 8 is still Shmita at some level. Then why am I allowed to do anything to my tree? Right? Meaning if the month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, starting at Shavuot, pre-Shmita, it's already really Shmita because the holiness overflowed and expanded into year 6. So why am I even allowed to work my tree to protect the apples from before, to protect the grapes from before? So here Rav Moshe says something fascinating. And he says, because there's a fundamental difference between Shabbat and Shmita. On Shabbat, you cannot perform melacha. I can't plow. I can't light a fire. I can't cook. I can't build. But Shmita is different because even during Shmita, I'm allowed to perform certain acts, right? Meaning even during Shmita, I'm allowed to keep my tree alive, right? I'm allowed to do acts that keep my tree alive. I just can't make it flourish more. I'm allowed to harvest so that I can eat. I just can't harvest in an industrial way that expresses ownership over the land more than anybody else. And therefore, he says, even Shmita itself, what you've got to understand is that during Shmita, I'm actually allowed to plow. I'm allowed to harvest. What I'm not allowed to do is harvest in such a way that it increases the yield of the seventh year. And therefore, he says, fascinatingly, that when it comes to Shmita, it's a misnomer to say that plowing is prohibited. Plowing could be permitted. It's a misnomer to say agricultural work is prohibited. It's sometimes permitted. The proper thing to say is, during Shmita, you can't do work that improves the field. You can do work that allows you to take advantage of eating from the field, but not one that improves the field itself. And therefore, Moshe says, the reason in year 6 I'm allowed to work on my trees, if necessary for the fruit from last year, is because during Shmita itself, I'm allowed to do work to maintain my tree. I'm allowed to do work as long as I'm not pushing the tree further. I'm just maintaining it, right? I'm just trying to benefit from the yield, but I'm not trying to push the land. So even during Shmita, that's true. So then it's definitely true during year 6 and year 8, right? During year 6, I can't push the, right? It's true that the holiness overflowed. So at some level, it's already Shmita. But still, the only type of thing that's ever prohibited in Shmita is work that pushes the field to do more rather than just allows you to take advantage of what was already produced. Because that's the whole point of Shmita. The whole point of Shmita is to eat it, right? You can't totally prohibit agriculture because you're allowed to plow, you're allowed to harvest during Shmita. You just have to limit it. You have to allow the poor people to do it. You have to allow the animals to eat it. You can't sell it. You have to share, right? But even in Shmita itself, agriculture isn't written off completely. It's just limited, and there's a perspective that's put on it. And therefore, the same is true in year 6, that I'm allowed to work on my trees in year 6, as long as I'm doing it to protect my trees from before, to protect my fruit from before, because that's the type of thing you can always do during Shmita. So I see a few questions. So, okay, I was worried I might not get to a lot of the sources. So good. So let me summarize the 2 models, take the questions, and we'll see if we have time for anything for anything else. But what we have here are 2 very different visions. One vision is that what Tosefet Shvi teaches us is that you can't really have a restful year, especially if it's not just you resting, but it's the land that needs to rest. If that's part of our theological claim, that God owns the land and he wants his land to rest, you can't do that if, using our employee parable, right, you force your worker to work overtime the week before he goes on vacation and to respond to his 200 emails that built up on the day after vacation, because then the vacation itself is missing. It's not a real rest. So one way of thinking about Shmita is like that, is that we need to be thoughtful and not just say, look, Shemitah's coming, we can't work during Shemitah, but we can shove in as much overtime as possible in year 6 and jump right back to work full force on the first day of year 8, right? Because if you do that, the land didn't get a rest, right? All you did was sort of, right, set in motion things that made the year work for you, right? And that's a problem because part of Shmitta is about letting the land rest. And that means thinking about the broader perspective and preparing in advance to let the land have its break. And afterwards, sensitively moving out of it and allowing, so to speak, the land to ease back in to its time to enjoy its rest, as it were. That's one model. The other model is no, Shmitta doesn't actually start in year 7. Shmitta actually starts in year 6 and ends in year 8. The holiness, even though it's centered in year 7, it overflows in both directions. So why is it that there are any exceptions at the end of year 6? Why is it that all that leading up to Shmitta, I'm still allowed to do some work? I'm still allowed to make sure that my fruit from last year are fine, because even during Shmitta, I'm allowed to do that. Because during Shmitta, agriculture isn't completely prohibited. Agriculture that pushes the land to produce something new rather than takes advantage of what was naturally set in motion just because of the agricultural cycle, right? Not like artificially in the days leading up to Shmitta, but just because I planted an apple tree 10 years ago, right? And it bears fruit every year, including Shmitta. Because Shmitta is not an absolute cessation, but it's a cessation from new produce. But you're actually encouraged to take advantage of the agricultural work that happens naturally at some level. So therefore, even though the holiness overflows and Shmitta starts before and continues after, it's not all prohibitive, right? Only certain actions are prohibited in that time leading up to Shmitta. Now I see here I have a question. Does the overflowing of holiness apply elsewhere and to other things, but not just time or place or people? So in the time remaining, I did want to get here, so I'll leave some of the technicalities, but you can look at the sources for some of the manifestations. Many thinkers, especially modern thinkers, are very fond of this. Hasidic thinkers are very fond of this, but not only. They take this idea of overflowing holiness as central to the idea of holiness in general. I know that Rabbi Kelman is very fond of this because I've edited several Divrei Torah over the years where he invokes this. But Rabbi Soloveitchik was very fond of talking about how what he felt one of the biggest problems in America was that, as he said, we taught people Shabbos and to be Shabbos Jews, but we failed in teaching them to be Erev Shabbos Jews, right? To recognize that Shabbat has to start earlier, right? If Shabbat is to be meaningful, you need to prepare. You need to, right now, whether you conceptualize that like Rashi, right, that I just need to prepare, or you say, no, the reason that I need to prepare is because at some level, the holiness actually overflows. And again, the Hasidic thinkers are very into this idea, right? The Hasidic thinkers think that the key to this, the reason that on Shabbat, which we didn't get to too much, but on Shabbat, we seem to also have a notion like this, though part of the question here is to what extent that's true, is because the whole idea of holiness is, it's not that it's limited to one time or one place, but it's concentrated in one place, but then it inspires everything else, right? So many Hasidic thinkers talk about the idea that Shabbat, we concentrate the Kedusha on Shabbat, the holiness on Shabbat, but even though we're working the rest of the week and it's fundamentally mundane, we're supposed to allow the holiness to inspire us and flow into the rest of the week. And that might be what Shmitta is about, right? That the way holiness works is that you can't live your entire life in extreme holiness, right? If every day was Shabbat in the normal world, so we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't work, we wouldn't have any food, we wouldn't be able to do anything, we wouldn't have houses, right? Because we couldn't build, we couldn't cook, we couldn't plant. So practically, we need Shabbat to be limited to one day a week. But even our mundane days, we want to think about Shabbat. We want it to be inspired by Shabbat, right? And as the Gemara says, both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai would figure out what meals they ate during the week to orient themselves around Shabbat. Beit Shammai would start saving the best food that he found anytime in the week for Shabbat. Beit Hillel wouldn't, but only because he had faith that God would find him something better. But they were always thinking about Shabbat. In terms of space, at some level, definitely philosophically, it's true as well, right? The Beit HaMikdash may be one place, but when we go to the Beit HaMikdash 3 times a year, right, at some level, we're supposed to take that holiness back with us. And we know that even the way holiness works in space, right, is that it's not like the Beit HaMikdash is the holiest place, and then the second you walk out of the Beit HaMikdash is totally mundane. But rather, even within the Beit HaMikdash itself, right, there's the Holy of Holies, and then there's the Kodesh Kodeshim, then there's the Kodesh. There's descending levels. Yerushalayim, right, all of Jerusalem has a certain level of holiness, right, meaning there is right, holiness it's not all or nothing, right? It emanates from a source, but then it influences in concentric circles that which is outside of it. And this idea of holiness being not just, right, Tosefet Shvi, not just being practical, that you have to prepare, but that holiness actually overflows, definitely philosophically, is important in the context of Shmita, in the context of Shabbat, in the context of Beit HaMikdash, of holiness in general, right? This idea in Kabbalah, for sure, someone asked here in Kabbalah, this is definitely central, right? In emanating Kabbalah, right? In Kabbalah, they have a very, very intense idea of this, right? Of emanations of holiness, that everything has a certain level of holiness, but even, right, non-Kabbalistic thinkers, again, Rabbi Soloveitchik is not a particularly mystical thinker, but the idea that holiness requires preparation, that at some level in anticipation, you need to already start recognizing, right, Friday is unique in order for Shabbat to be unique. I think that really is central to what holiness means in general. And therefore, right, I think it's important to think about this idea of Tosefet Shvi, because again, there are the two ways of thinking it. One is you need to prepare to make sure the land rests, or two, that the holiness overflows. At some level, both of those models are true in all things that we have which are holy, not just Shmita, but Shmita, Shabbat, etc. That anything for it to be holy needs preparation, and second, has the ability to influence and affect that which is beyond it. Maybe not in the same intensity, right? But it has the power to inspire and influence that which is outside of it. And therefore, I think the fact that the Mishnah's discussion of Shmita, of Shvi'it, doesn't actually start during Shmita, but tells you that already weeks and months before Shmita, you might have to start thinking about, what do I need to do now to make sure that Shmita is celebrated properly? And maybe Shmita starts earlier because it just overflows. Besides for just the practical point, which is that chronologically, that is the first thing you need. Conceptually speaking, I think that it's important, both for Shmita and for holiness in general, to remember these 2 points, right? That on the one hand, holiness requires preparation and planning, right? And if you want the land to rest, you got to make sure that you don't overwhelm it. And two, to recognize that the whole purpose of holiness is that it has the ability to overflow and influence and inspire that which is beyond it. And that we should take that, not just for Shmita, where we should start preparing ourselves now and take its lessons into the years following, in a year from now, starting in year 8, right? But also on Shabbat, that we should really internalize the fact that in order to make Shabbat special, we need to make sure that Friday, right, at some level, we're preparing, we're thinking it's special, and that we don't rush out of Shabbat on the other end. And these two models, the importance of preparation, the importance of letting holiness overflow and inspire, I think both halachically and philosophically are really central to the way halacha views holiness in general, Shmita in particular. So I thought that this was a proper way to end as we finish these weeks leading up to Shmita, to get ourselves prepared, both in the practical sense, to start thinking about what Shmita means, and also to recognize that at some level holiness can overflow, and to embrace that so that we're ready to experience Shmita. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to learn about Shmita, and it's less felt outside of Israel than it will be in Israel, where this will affect what we eat and what stores we buy at and things like that. But even just to learn about Shmita and internalize its lessons in the weeks leading up to it, so that it inspires us during Shmita and in the time afterwards, I think that really is central to what Sevet Shmita is all about, to what holiness is all about. So I'm glad that we got to at least talk about it a little bit, so that we can begin inspiring ourselves as Shmita is upon us in just a few short weeks. Okay, a few more questions here. Because of Shmita, did Bnei Israel become better traders? I don't know. It's possible. There is the holy that Hashem created. Hashem created the fruit. We then facilitate so that we can accept this blessing. Yeah, I mean, part of it is this, right? Is that part of this idea of adding to holiness, right? Salvation really develops this in a different piece, right? Is that Shabbat itself has two elements, right? There's what God made holy, but on the other hand, God demands that we make things holy. And adding to Shabbat and adding to Shemitah might be part of that, right? That the core is holy because God said so, but he also tells us that you must sanctify beyond it. And at some level, that duality of God's of what God made holy and what he demanded that we make holy, I think that might be part of this as well, but unfortunately that will have to be a series for another time. Okay, right, Kelman? It's all yours. I went a little bit over time, but it's still only an hour because we started late. I can see it in my timer over here. So
okay, thank you. Well, the preparing for number 7 of Shabbat and Shemitah, of course, the 7th month. That's probably why all our holidays are in the 7th month. 7 is the holy everything in our system of numbers, and of course that also requires a lot of preparation. That's whole other shiurim. Elul is the preparation for the every year. But thank you very much, Rabbi. Always a pleasure. And
my pleasure.
And okay, we'll send.
Hopefully one day I'll see you again in person.
Yes, I can't come to Israel. As far as I know, I would not be let in. Hopefully,
not yet. Eventually, we hope.
Eventually, although they've made it harder to get in, not easier. But okay, whatever. It's we need Israeli technology to find their brilliance, not only to vaccines, to find a cure. I know cures for viruses apparently are medically very, very hard, but that will be a game changer. I hope.
Oh, we all hope.
We all hope. Okay, because every once in a while I see in the newspaper, they're working on this and they treated this in this study, and whether it's peer reviewed, not. I don't know. We'll have to.
Yeah, and then they're coming with new vaccines they hope won't be subject to the same
variants.
Variants, because it'll attack not the spike proteins, but the body of the virus.
Listen,
I don't know. We hope.
Scientists learned a lot, and I guess if we believe the refuah is always there before the makkah, that's sort of our traditional belief. So it's out there. We just have to harness it a little bit. But anyways, so okay, I won't ask you what you do in terms of the heter mechira, and but it is. I spent 2 of my years in yeshiva were in Shemitah years in Israel. So
yeah, my shana bet was Shemitah. Last Shemitah I was actually we were in Toronto, so I was not here last time.
No, so I was in Shmitta when I was in yeshiva for the year in Israel. And then when I went back after we got married to spend the year in Israel, that was also a Shemitah year. So anyways, okay, choice. But I guess every year it changed, and more they can get kedushat shvit payroll. I think it's easier each time. Or it's still very hard.
Though this year, I haven't, right, because Israel is in the process, not because of Shemitah, but because of living expenses, right? Is in the process of lowering the tariffs and barriers to bringing in foreign produce,
right, and allowing us to rely on U.S. Regulatory approval and not
EU.
Own.
But yeah. Right. So I honestly don't know what that's going to do to Shemitah, right? Because that once you do that, it's not going to be like special imports of Yimel Nachri, right? It's just going to be part of the natural, like what's found in the stores, just because of competition. So right. I don't know what that's going to do to Shemitah exactly, right? I don't know what's going to do
I don't know that it'll be implemented for this year. That's just a proposal in the budget that hasn't passed yet. So I don't know.
But that was one of the first things they wanted to pass. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyways, all right.
But yeah, that could change things. So I don't even, what I remember from last time was that there was, at least around this area, there's a lot of, there is you can relatively easily find Otzar Bet and stuff that has Kiddushat Shvi'it.
I guess
relatively easily.
Rav Bimon is a big believer in eating. It's a mitzvah, the Ramban, to eat.
Yeah, so you can find that, I think, pretty easily in this area. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't know.
All right. Hatzlacha. Okay. Should be a good year for everybody. Next Thursday, I believe at 1 p.m. So Ari Shvat is beginning a 5-part series on Orot HaTshuva of Rav Kook. That'll be our next Thursday class. Monday, Mark Shapiro is resuming after, I guess, a year and a half, going back to his original series, Great Rabbinic Thinkers Monday. This time, Rav Shaul Lieberman was, of course, he actually wrote a book, Mark Shaul Lieberman and the Orthodox, and of course he learned in Slobodka, was an observant, person, but spent his main part of the career at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And then we have, what else is starting next week? We have Sefer Yonah. Rabbi Helfgall will be starting in a week, and we have Daniel Reinhold will be giving a series on Tshuva, who was just now the Dean of Revel. I don't know if you learned with him, Rabbi. Did you?
I did, undergraduate and graduate school.
Undergraduate. Okay, I met him when he was in Toronto last year for.
I remember. I'm a big fan of his. I took him for 19th, 20th century philosophy and for.
I think he's starting
philosophy of free will.
He's starting the following week, I believe, and we have a whole bunch of series there on the website. We'll be sending out an email, so we look forward to learning with you. And Jonathan Hatzlacha, how many kids coming to yeshiva this year?
27, 28 Shana Aleph plus Shana Bet, so 30 something, which is our goal. We always want to be between 30 and 35. We also have some Torontonians this year.
Or some more Chaim kids, I presume.
2 Or Chaim, yeah. We have Shlomo Korobkin and Eli Whitten.
Really? Oh, okay. So I know
good kids.
I know the kid. I know the parents. I don't know the kids. But,
good kids, good families.
Okay,
good.
Yeah. You know the families too. So very
I know
good.
The kids. I know the families. Eli used to come to my Daf Yomi when he was in 9th grade in the Bayou.
Okay. Wow.
And Shlomo, I just know from shul. But
right. Okay. Very nice. All right. Enjoy. Thank you very much again. All the best. Okay, everybody.
Okay, have a good Shabbos.
And this evening, of course, Rabbi Eitan Aviner will be giving the Parshat of Shavuot here, 8:30 Eastern, 3:30 a.m. in Israel, for those who are interested who have insomnia. Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.